I want you to imagine two types of games. The first is the most agonizingly difficult game you've ever experienced. It's deliberately frustrating and actively goes out of its way to make the player as miserable as possible. However, upon completing each major trial of this game, you're able to witness one part of the greatest story you've ever seen. The second game is pure unfiltered fun. Not a second goes by where you're not in awe of just how exciting and delightful this game is. Even the mere act of moving from one place to another is reason enough to spend hours in this world. It is without question the most enjoyable game you've ever played. You know what I'm going to ask you next, right? Which one would you prefer to play? This isn't just a hypothetical about games that don't really exist. It's a situation that represents an even more important question. A question that's plagued me over the past year. One that's only gotten more difficult to answer with the release of some of the games we'll talk about today. It seems simple on the surface, but the more I think about it, the more complicated it becomes. And it's a question that I'm willing to bet probably affects you too in ways you might not even realize. So today, I want to try to figure it out. When playing a game, what's more important? The journey or the destination? Okay, before anything else, we need to establish some ground rules. What exactly do I mean by the journey and the destination? The way I see it, games at their most basic level are comprised of a challenge and a reward for completing that challenge. This idea fits into practically any game. In Mario, your challenge is to get to the end of the level and your reward is progress. In a JRPG, your challenge is a secret boss and your reward is a cool new sword. In Fortnite, your challenge is surviving till the end and your reward is getting your #1 victory royale. I do not have footage of getting a #1 victory royale. This is how every game works, and these are the definitions we're going to use for the journey and the destination. The journey is the challenge you face. The destination is the reward that waits for you at the end. With this in mind, you may already believe the answer to that initial question of which one is more important is right in front of us. If the journey is the challenge, that's this much of the game, and the destination is the reward, which is only this much, then the journey is obviously more important, right? Well, allow me to ask a question that complicates things and totally flips this simple idea on its head. Is it ever worth it to pursue a destination when you don't enjoy the journey? Let's unpack this by separating rewards into two types. You've got intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. Intrinsic rewards are rewards that come from you. A perfect example of this is something like speedrunning. Unless you're one of the best players in the world, improving your time doesn't really mean anything externally. To you, however, clearing that section slightly faster than you did in your previous runs is intrinsically rewarding. It's a goal that you set for yourself and you've managed to complete it. The game doesn't care about this accomplishment, you do. It's an intrinsic reward. An example of this in an actual game is something like Mooncat. This is a strange game where you play as this thing, which I'm gonna guess is a mooncat. Anyway, it looks like a basic and simple platformer at a glance. The moment you look at the controls though, you start to realize it's anything but. You see, this game has two inputs, left and right. The trick is that those inputs are mapped to one half of your controller, meaning all of the face buttons, A, B, X, and Y, or X, square, circle, and triangle, will all make you go to the right, while every direction on the D-pad will make you go left. This is tough to wrap your head around when you first boot up the game, but there's something immensely satisfying about watching your brain rewire itself in real time and adapt to this bizarre control scheme. Yet again, the game doesn't reward you for getting 10% better at this. There are no in-game achievements or power-ups that you can only unlock by not accidentally pressing right on the D-pad when there's a hole next to you. The reward is almost entirely generated by you. It exists in the progress you make and the improvement you display. Extrinsic rewards, on the other hand, are rewards that are given to you in-game. Something like Digimon Time Stranger is full of this stuff. Every quest you do gives you anomaly points. These points increase your stats, give you new moves, and make it easier for you to evolve your Digimon into newer, stronger forms. The gameplay loop here is constructed around these extrinsic rewards, and it's hard to do practically anything in this game without getting a reward for it. Another much more simple example of an extrinsic reward that you can actually try out right now if you want is pressing the subscribe button to see more great videos like this one. Crucially, the difference between this and something like Mooncat is that the way you play the game actively changes as you gain these rewards. You can strip this down to its most basic level by looking at Agumon compared to something like his evolution, War Greymon. The latter has two signature moves and the former has one. Even if there was literally no other difference in looks, stats, or anything else, you're still being rewarded with an extra signature move, and that reward directly changes how you can play the game. Now, you could argue that all rewards in all games are extrinsic, since without any type of feedback at all, there wouldn't really be a game in the first place. Mooncat's extrinsic reward could be you progressing through the stage and seeing new enemies and obstacles, for example. However, this is pretty similar to saying, well, actually, all difficulty is artificial, therefore determining whether or not something is artificially difficult is pointless. It's just a boring way to shut down the entire discussion with a technicality. So for for the sake of this video and my sanity, we're gonna stick with what we've got. So with all that in mind, we can look at some increasingly significant examples of journeys and destinations in games to see if there's ever a point where you should persist through a journey that you don't enjoy. Before that, there is one last reward I want to mention, the reward of a good night's sleep. Tragically, cars, sirens, and the neighborhood dogs don't really care about me getting a good night's sleep. That's where Manta, the sponsor of this video, comes in with their new white noise machine. A trend that carries through all of Manta's products is this premium feel, and the white noise machine is no different. The first thing I noticed when taking this thing out of the box was just how durable and compact it felt. No rattling, no loose buttons, no awkward gaps, and no LEDs. That last one is a small thing, but I mean, for a product that's supposed to help you sleep, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer. The controls are extremely simple, being just one button press to start with no menus or other things to sort through. Adding on to this simplicity, it's got tactile buttons, a feature I dearly miss in a lot of modern tech. And on top of all of this, the button is huge. I mean, look at my hands for reference. I can almost palm a basketball, so that should give you a good idea of how big this button is. That may seem like a minor detail, but it's genuinely great how effortless this makes turning it on and off. Unlike most white noise machines, this one doesn't just emit sound to mask outside noise, it creates a shield to block that noise before it reaches you. So reward yourself with the sleep that you deserve and check out the Manta white noise machine. You can even use my code to get 10% off and support the channel in the process. Let me ask you a question. What colors are on your screen right now? This isn't a trick, really, there are only 3 of them, so what are they? Purple, yellow, and orange. Easy, right? Now, here's the thing. These aren't technically purple, yellow, and orange. They're actually red, blue, and green. See, the pixels in your monitor, phone, or TV are only really emitting red, blue, and green light, yet it looks like any other color in the spectrum when you zoom out. So which one is it? You might think this is brown, but upon zooming out, it's actually Gyrototis. I do not like Gyrototis. It's a miserable boss, and I have never once enjoyed fighting it or any of its extended family. Unfortunately for me, this boss drops some parts that are necessary to create great armor for my favorite weapon. So now we've got our journey, fighting the boss, and our destination, obtaining the armor. This isn't a hard boss by any means, and it's not really supposed to be. Equally, you only have to beat it a few times to get the armor. Logically then, the reward is probably worth it, but if we extrapolate this idea out to the entire game, it begins to totally fall apart. Check this out. If you don't enjoy fighting this one boss, that's fine. Beat it, get the drops, and never think about it again. If you don't enjoy fighting any boss and you're just in it for the reward, then the entire game becomes a series of fighting something you don't want to fight to get some shiny new gear that you then use on more bosses that you don't want to fight. Why would you even play the game at that point? The reward is meaningless here since it doesn't actually get us any closer to enjoying the game. Elden Ring is an even better example of this. Generally speaking, most of the bosses in Elden Ring are harder than most of the bosses in Monster Hunter, although it's totally possible that I only think that because I have 3,000 hours in this series and like 500 in this one. I don't know, take it with a grain of salt. Not only are the bosses in Elden Ring particularly challenging, but the ways in which you have to fight them are too. You'll often find yourself against multiple bosses at the same time, or even normal enemies with statuses that, if you haven't prepared for them, will end the fight before it even begins. The rewards you get here are just as substantial as those in Monster Hunter, if not more so, but yet again, the actual process of obtaining those rewards is the game. That's all you do. So if you're not enjoying that, how could the rewards ever be worth it? This is where you can already start to see why this question isn't as simple as it looks. If we look at a small sample, it seems like the reward is more valuable, but when you zoom out and apply it to the entire game, it's clear the opposite is true. So which is correct? Is the screen yellow, or is it red, green, and blue? There's more to this, and we might be looking at it the wrong way, so toss this idea in your folder for now, and we'll come back to it later. Okay, for this next example, I want you to think about a game that you would play regardless of the reward that it presented to you. A game that you play solely for the journey. For me, one of those games is the perfect argument in favor of the journey, since I think that's what the devs themselves believed was more important when they created it. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a very interesting game. It's a game with extremely limited fast travel, and without that fast travel, it forces you to spend hours trekking from one town to the next. Even if you do use one of the game's modes of transportation, there's a chance that your fast travel is interrupted. It's a game that gradually depletes your max health as you fight, and doesn't allow you to recover it until you rest at a campsite or an inn. There will be times where... Wait, did you hear that? What was that? Dragon's Dogma 2 is a game that prioritizes the journey over the destination. In a world filled with games that are desperate to hold your attention at any cost, Dragon's Dogma 2 stands in total opposition to that idea. It's intentionally inconvenient in a way that most games are afraid to be, yet directly because of this more obtuse nature, it's one of the most enjoyable games I've ever played. Equally, the actual gameplay here is outstanding. The combat isn't as technical and precise as something like Mega Man Zero or Fury, but it almost feels like Capcom took the most cinematic parts of Monster Hunter bosses and just made that into an entire game. Here, let me give you an example. Actually, wait, if you have plans to play this game, skip to the timestamp on screen. This sequence is way too cool to spoil. Alright, so I was fighting this griffin and I hopped onto its head to deal some extra damage by attacking its weakest spot. As I'm doing exactly that, it jumps into the air and I think nothing of it until... If this is the journey, I simply do not care about the destination. I'm not sure there's another game where going from one place to the next is as fun as Dragon's Dogma 2. There are countless unexpected events, and despite the game's numerous flaws, it's worth playing for these journeys alone. Let's come back to Earth for a minute and balance things out by looking at a more significant reward. This one comes from the game of the year, Xenoblade X. Oh no, that's not a typo in the script, nor did I misspeak. Xenoblade X isn't my game of the year, it's just the best game that released in 2025. Anyway, all you have to do is look at the cover art of this game and you'll see the reward. A giant mech. These are called skells, and they were all over the promotional material back in 2015 and in the ridiculously small number of trailers that we got before the game's remaster dropped this year. They're a central and iconic part of the game, like the energy sword from Halo, the elemental system in Crosscode, or Cappy in Mario Odyssey. However, something strange about these skells is the fact that you don't actually get one until about halfway through your adventure. This is done very deliberately though. The developers wanted skells to feel more significant. In an interview with the developers and the legendary Iwata, the latter asked about balancing these enormous machines with normal gameplay, to which one of the lead developers, Kojima, not that one, claimed that he wanted the difference between skells and humans to feel drastic. It was all about creating this contrast, and in a way, increasing the significance of this reward. These massive extrinsic rewards are one of the most brilliant parts of Xenoblade X. While I'd have to give it some more thought, the game may have the most significant extrinsic rewards I've ever seen. Skells completely alter the combat. They change not just how you fight, but even what you fight. There are these colossal monsters that roam the world. Simply walking too close to them will send you cartoonishly flying away, and you can totally forget about actually challenging them to a fight. Unless you have an optimized endgame build, they'll wipe your entire party without even batting an eye. You effectively can't fight these things. You just have to flee on sight if you ever encounter one. Getting a skell changes that thanks to their outlandishly powerful nature. If you want to fight certain creatures on foot, you'll have to obtain certain gear, carefully map out your skills and arts, master your build and general role in battle, then execute that plan to near perfection. Alternatively, you could choose to pull up in a skell and the fight would look something like this. Yet it doesn't merely change how you fight, it changes how you explore the world as well. You're significantly faster, you can launch into the air multiple times higher than you could before, and you can walk through environmental hazards without a care in the world. All of this together makes it feel like once you get your skell, you're playing a different game. So in theory, if you don't enjoy the first half, it may be worth it to persevere until you reach that second half and finally get your reward. Another reward that I would argue is close to this level is what awaits you in the story or at the end of some side quests in RPGs like Skyrim or the inconceivably underrated indie game Arco. I obviously can't go in depth on these since doing so would require spoiling what makes them so special, but I can talk about the wider trend. Even if you didn't enjoy the gameplay of Arco, first of all you're lying, the reward is similar to that hypothetical game from the start. For enduring whatever challenges you had to endure in the gameplay, you're rewarded with these extraordinary stories that unfold in a thought-provoking way that'll linger in your head for weeks, months, or even years to come. Stories that may well change the way you view and live your own life. Seriously, please, I'm begging you, play Arco. The dev said he's not going to make any more games like this because it flopped. Please, Of course, you could just watch a playthrough on YouTube, but that removes an integral part of the medium. Interaction. Watching someone else play a game isn't the same as playing the game yourself. For example, if a character is meant to be crazy powerful, the gameplay can actually demonstrate that by making their boss fight extremely challenging. If you just watch somebody else first try it, you don't get that same experience. Even if you don't actually enjoy the process of losing to a boss 100 times, it's necessary in fully taking advantage of the strength of this medium. Both of these are situations in which the rewards are so monumental and game-changing that they may actually be worth it regardless of the journey. The journey of a 20-hour game is important, but how could that 20 hours of suffering ever compare to a destination that you'll be thinking about for the rest of your life? None of us are going to live forever, at least as far as we know. Naturally then, we have a limited amount of time to do the things we wish to do before the big man upstairs calls our number. I mean, or downstairs? I don't know what kind of stuff you do with your life. Maybe you're watching this in prison. Do they have YouTube in prison? Focus. My point is, you can't play every game. Think about how many games you've played this year relative to how many games have actually come out this year. Let's say you've managed a little over 1 game per month on average, and you'll be at 20 by the end of December. If you're around 25 years old right now, that gives you roughly 60 to 80 years to play games. Assuming you never take any breaks and keep up that streak of 20 a year every single year, you've got time for about 1,400 games. Now, look at me, be honest. We both know you have more games than that in your Steam library right now. These are pretty optimistic numbers too. I mean, we're assuming the world doesn't end, the life expectancy goes up, and you live a long and healthy life, all while never dropping below 20 games a year. More realistically, you'll get married, that'll slow you down a bit, maybe you'll have a kid, work gets busy, you get burnout from playing so many games, the list goes on. So since our time is this limited, is it really worth it to spend that time on a journey you don't enjoy? Here's an even more concerning factor to consider. Isn't spending time on a journey you don't enjoy with the assumption that the destination will be worth it a bit of a gamble? You're hoping that it'll pay off when you reach the end, whatever that end may be. But what if that reward is lackluster? What if you finally overcome that boss in Elden Ring only to get a weapon that doesn't fit your build at all? What if you finish that mind-numbingly boring side quest just for the resolution to be mediocre at best? This is such a terrifying gamble because you're not putting up your money. You're risking the most valuable resource you have: your time. When I asked the good people this question, there was an idea that popped up time and time again. For a practical example of this idea, let me tell you about one of my favorite games this year that I hated the majority of. While I do think this game is objectively great and I respect a lot of the choices the devs made, my personal feelings about it are rather complicated. Crack open that folder from earlier. We spent a lot of time talking about extrinsic rewards, and this game has plenty of those, but I found, especially late game, that those weren't what drove me to move forward. It was the other type of reward that we haven't gone into yet: intrinsic rewards. You see, something funny happened as I approached the later parts of this game. Some of the areas were excessively challenging and annoying, equally too were many of the bosses. Yet, as I progressed, something that the developers mentioned in an interview became more and more clear. In this interview, Ari Gibson, one of the 2 founding members of Team Cherry, was asked about his thoughts on the game's difficulty, to which he replied, they, being the players, have ways to mitigate the difficulty via exploration or learning or even circumventing the challenge entirely. As I progressed further and further into this nightmarish land filled with discount Kryptonians and Viltrumites around every corner, I gradually, slowly but surely, did get stronger. I unlocked attacks that allowed me to better exploit openings when I found them. I gained new tools and abilities that let me deal damage from a safe distance or passively attack without even having to swing. In short, the more I explored, the easier the game got, and I really enjoyed that. Here's the weird part though. As I reached some of the game's most challenging bosses and what I'd consider to be some of the best, I started doing something that I hadn't done in the game up to that point. I started holding back. Mastery is the epitome of an intrinsic reward. Back in Mooncat earlier, that feeling of mastery was a large part of why the game was so much fun. Equally, if we look at games like Elden Ring and Monster Hunter, the goal isn't necessarily to make your character stronger, it's to make you, the player, more powerful, more adept, more skilled, more prepared to counter anything the opposition throws at you, not because of your tools in-game, but because of how your brain has adapted outside of it. When I encountered these bosses in Silksong, I didn't care what reward waited for me at the end of the fight. I just wanted to enjoy it for as long as I could. The wonderful thing about intrinsic rewards is the fact that the process itself becomes the reward. However, due to this reward being intrinsic, by its very nature, not everyone is going to be able to enjoy it. Some people don't want to lose to a boss over and over. They don't enjoy that slow, oftentimes arduous process of getting better. That reward, and by extension, enjoyment, has to come from you. So ultimately, which one is more important? The trial or the reward? The journey or the destination? Well, as usual, it depends on the context and the person answering the question. If you ask me, I'd rank them like this: intrinsically motivated destinations, then journeys, then extrinsic destinations. There are plenty of cases where the answer is easy, and in the majority of games, the journey is going to matter more. I just don't want to take a gamble on a destination that I might not enjoy. However, if the reward is intrinsic, then that gamble no longer exists. An intrinsic reward comes directly from you, so there's no need to worry about whether the payoff the game gives you will be worth it or not, because that extrinsic reward is secondary. It's just a bonus. With intrinsic rewards, the trial itself is the reward. The journey and the destination are the same thing. So with that in mind, I'll leave you with one final question, the most important one of all. Regardless of what trials you may have to face, and regardless of how challenging, boring, or frustrating they may be, are you still enjoying the journey?